There's a line that goes, if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. Well, we've got double standards, but we're getting close to having none at all. We reject what used to be common courtesy in favor of acting authentically. What was unthinkable yesterday is compulsory today. The public displays of lewd and aggressive behavior are bad enough, but we're going much farther. Public figures and legitimate media are floating the idea of barring citizens from entering businesses or traveling unless they submit to an injection that they don't want. All for a virus that more than 99% of infected people survive. All of that, plus a discussion with my good friend George Zamarripa, this week on Disaffected. Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum, and this is the show where we look at culture and politics through a psychological lens. So let's start right out. Got some bits and bobs to talk about in this first part of the show. And in the second part, we're going to be joined by my very good friend, George Zamarripa, who I went to college with, and he's going to talk with us about what it has been like to be a gay man, basically at the tail end of the 1980s and into the 90s, and then when we started school together, and how far we've both come politically and culturally since everything has changed in the past 20 or 25 years. So definitely stick around. This week, I noticed something strange. It's not going to be the last time it happens, of course, but on Twitter, I really appreciate that many of the people who follow me on Twitter, who are also viewers, listeners to the show, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys when you share this show. It helps the show, and it helps get the message out. And the message that I want to get out to people is that there is a way to understand the moment that we're living in. There's a way to understand the fractured and dysfunctional ways that we communicate with each other. And that a big part of that answer has to do with traits that we often find in cluster B personality disorders: narcissism, splitting, everybody's all good or all bad, ginned up, confected victimhood. These are all behaviors and dispositions and attitudes toward the world that anybody, normal range people, personality disorder people, anybody can indulge in them, but we've got such an excess of them right now. I think we do have, as I've said in past shows, we do actually have a greater number of people with cluster B personality disorders today than we used to. I can see it anecdotally. It's backed up by some of the literature. But all of us, even the normal range people, we are far more narcissistic and self-regarding than we used to be. And so thank you for telling people that there is a way that they can understand this. And thank you for sharing our show as part of the answer to that question. And it's funny because I was talking to my therapist, as I do every 2 weeks, and he said, jokingly, not jokingly, I mean, he meant it, but he said it in a lighthearted sort of way, because he's seen a few episodes of the show. He goes, you better be careful. You're going to start triggering a lot of psychotherapists. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, if you mention the term personal responsibility, taking care of things for yourself, taking responsibility for how you interact with the world, there are a lot of psychotherapists out there that find that extremely threatening. And he's right. But that's not the only thing, excuse me, that mental health professionals seem to be reactant to. So somebody who followed me on Twitter, who goes by the name Rib Rotgut, hello Rib, we'll put it up on the screen here. He shared our episode on masking covert narcissism. And this is what he said. I'm an ex-liberal progressive Democrat, now a dissident centrist who left the left in disgust over wokeness. And he put a link up to our episode on masking covert narcissism and invited people to watch it. And a man named Craig Malkin, who styles himself Dr. Craig Malkin, who apparently has written a book called Rethinking Narcissism. I haven't read the book. It looks interesting. I read the abstract and the description on Amazon. It appears to be a book that talks about the spectrum of narcissism from healthy self-esteem all the way up to full personality disorder. And that is an interesting topic because when we talk about narcissism, we're usually talking about it in the context of something of narcissistic personality disorder or unhealthy and dysfunctional levels of narcissism, even if they don't rise all the way to the level of a personality disorder. But narcissism is not a synonym for bad, right? Toxic narcissism and excess of narcissism is what we're pointing to, but there is such a thing as healthy narcissism. So I'll probably read the book because it looks interesting. But apparently I don't look very interesting to Mr. Malkin, Dr. Malkin, because his response to the tweet from this user recommending my show, and I can't actually quote it for you. I'm paraphrasing very closely. It's very close to what he said, but you'll see why I can't quote it for you. His response to that person was, I'm not going to watch that because people like that make up stuff as they go along. I thought, I'm a people like that. I don't know who the people like that are. My guess is that he's talking about lay people who talk about narcissism. I've seen this reaction from not a few mental health professionals. There's a lot of gatekeeping is one word for it. But there are some out there who don't seem to like lay people talking about narcissism and narcissistic abuse dynamics. So that's my guess. But of course, Craig Malkin doesn't know who I am, and is not interested in knowing who I am, which is absolutely fine. But I just thought that was a pretty strong reaction to something I hadn't seen. So what I wrote back was, what a strange response. And then I went back the next morning to see if he had responded. I was wondering if he might start a conversation. And this is what I found. I'm blocked. So I either inadvertently touched a nerve, or Dr. Craig Malkin is very, very touchy. So at any rate, I'm a person like that, and you'll never see or hear this, but Craig, if you'd like to come on the show and talk about your views on narcissism, I'd love to have you on. Maybe I'll see you then. Next thing. I should keep a running list of the stuff that I see every day. I do sort of keep a mental list because I bring some of it into the show for you, but I should actually keep a notebook. Because I've talked before about how we are, as a society, we seem to be losing etiquette, rules, boundaries. The normal courtesies that act as a lubricant to make our interactions with each other in public go reasonably smoothly and go in a way that is predictable are eroding. I've talked about encounters I've had with, I know it's little stuff. I know that a lot of this stuff by itself is small stuff, but small stuff adds up. People who don't put their carts back in grocery store parking lots, that just leave them in the middle of a handicapped parking spot. The fact that you can walk into a store these days, and if the person serving you is under 30 years old, you'll be very lucky if they will acknowledge you. And I mean, you'll be lucky if they look at you. Eye contact is apparently out with this generation, the younger generation. They don't like to look at you. They don't greet you. Sometimes when you say, hi, how are you? They actually don't respond. And no, I can already hear the objections. Sure, maybe some of them are autistic or on the Asperger's scale, but all of them, or a great majority of them, this is common behavior. I don't think it's all chalked up to that. I think our standards are changing. And I've also noticed this in terms of driving on the road. Basic rules that not only help people to keep their temper with each other when we're all out driving 2 tons of steel and trying to negotiate our way safely from point A to point B, they not only help us to keep in a calm frame of mind, but they actually prevent us from killing each other. Rules like how to take turns at a stop sign or a 4-way intersection. It might be regional, but I can tell you in Vermont, there are no rules anymore. None at all. People will not observe them. There's no shared convention. You get up to a 4-way stop sign and people edge up to each other. They look, then somebody who got there after you insists that you go first. And at first I chided myself a little bit. I'm like, no, everybody here's really, really nice. That's all. They just don't want to take the first turn. And again, I mentioned it to my therapist. And this is noteworthy because usually I'm the one who has the most cynical interpretation. But my therapist said I was being too optimistic and too naive. He thinks that is a form of virtue signaling. This whole sort of, I'm not going to take my turn at a stop sign. I'm going to very publicly perform how gracious I am to let you do it. And it ends up being frustrating because nobody knows whose goddamn turn it is, right? I see this behavior on the road. We know that young men are more likely to be aggressive. They're more likely to speed. They're more likely to tailgate. But it's not just young men anymore. I see it happening with young women. The behaviors that I used to think were cocky, testosterone-laden, 18-year-old boy behavior, I am now seeing that behavior in girls and young women. And no, I'm not saying that girls aren't allowed to because girls have to be nice. I'm not an unreconstructed sexist. What I am saying is aggressive, antisocial behavior is becoming normalized to a degree that a population that is not known for acting that way by default, young women, they are less aggressive than young men, they are now doing it too. This is making aggressive, antisocial behavior normalized. So I pull into a mall parking lot the other day and I get out of my car and I see this SUV sitting there with a bumper sticker on it. And we'll put this up on the screen. This is a black SUV and there's a Hello Kitty sticker and Hello Kitty's winking, you know, a little cute Japanese kitty. And it looks like she's got something. Yeah, she's got a heart motif with her. And a little cutesy script right next to it in the back window. This window sticker says, "You just got passed by a girl." Okay, it doesn't say, I added that, but you know it goes with it. That's not actually cute. That's what we call passive aggressive. But I like psychologist George K. Simon's formulation better. He says, passive aggressive is really not an accurate way to describe it because it is aggression and it's not passive. It's covert aggression. It's veiled aggression. And the veiling that's happening here is playing on the idea that young women and girls are nice. They're not pushy. They're not going to tailgate you. It's playing on that. And it's using a cutesy, girly little font to say, you just got passed by a girl. You know, I don't know this person, but I don't think I want to because I don't think it's cute and I don't think it's funny. It strikes me as the kind of mindset that somebody has who is looking to find offense and who's looking for an excuse to display aggression to other people. And there's a lot of this among young women these days, you know. I'm a girl power. I can do anything I want. You just got passed by a girl. I know that they would say, you know, they're just evening the playing field. I don't think so. I don't think it's getting yours back. I think it's ginning up unpleasant encounters for the sake of it. Speaking of using the affectations of girly stuff to get a message across, way back when this show was new, I did a long segment on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our elected representative from Brooklyn, and how she used a sense of an image of victimhood to get people to feel sorry for her after the trespassing and riots and protests and the breaking into the Capitol building on January 6th. And she strategically disclosed during some interviews after this about how scared she was, how traumatized she was, how she thought the cop who was actually trying to come and help her was actually trying to hurt her. She strategically disclosed that she was a victim of sexual assault. For pity points, it had nothing to do with what happened at the Capitol that day. She was saying, I'm a victim of sexual assault, so therefore I was having a trauma reaction. Everybody feels sorry for me. It was very Machiavellian. Well, let's take a look at, she's stepped it up. She stepped it up this week. Let's take a look at a recent interview she gave.
That attack on the Capitol, you know, white supremacy and patriarchy are very linked in a lot of ways. There's a lot of sexualizing of that violence. And I didn't think that I was just going to be killed. I thought other things were going to happen to me as well.
So what sounds like what you're telling me right now is that you didn't only think that you were going to die, you thought you were going to be raped.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear that? Yeah. It's the whole thing with her. She's taken it to the next level here. Not only was she traumatized, not only did she think that she was going to be hurt or killed, she thought she was going to be raped. She will not let this go. This is insane. This is insane. She was not in any danger. She wasn't even in the building that got broken into. She knows this. We can give her some leeway. We might think that her original response, to the degree that she felt as scared and traumatized as she claimed she did, and I don't think she probably did, but I can definitely believe that she was nervous and might have felt fear. And it is perfectly plausible that people who have been assaulted before are on a hair trigger for dangerous situations like that. That's not lunatic. But this exaggeration is lunatic. She knows she wasn't in any actual danger, but she keeps milking this. And I know that many of you watching this will notice this, but I have to point it out just in case anybody doesn't see it on their own. This is another way of using a feminine affectation to gin up sympathy and to do something that isn't really within bounds and get excused for it. Her entire demeanor is an affect. It's an affectation. It's histrionic theater. She uses a really small voice. She makes her mouth really small so that when she's talking, it sounds like a little girl who's scared, right? This is what she does. This is theater. And she uses those big bug eyes, to look like Bambi, like a fawn or a doe. And she's pretty. I realize that taste is subjective and not everybody will agree, but I think a lot of people would agree that she's a very attractive woman. She has a pretty face. And she uses it. This is histrionics. And we don't seem to learn the lesson. She's done this over and over again. She's still doing it how many months later? I'm telling you, for all the talk about toxic masculinity, I think a lot of what's actually going on in our culture is toxic femininity that we are not allowed to call toxic femininity. Now, speaking of appearance and looks, next thing I want to talk about is last week I said, was it last week or the week before? Doesn't matter. I said that we seem to be in a time when ugly ducklings are getting their revenge. People who make themselves look ridiculous, unappealing, metal in their face, rainbow hair colors. They do everything they can to look as unattractive by most people's standards as they possibly can, but they walk around acting like they're beautiful and policing people for not clapping for them and saying that they're beautiful. It really is like out of a John Waters movie. It's like Divine in Pink Flamingos. It's ridiculous, horrifying nightmare version of a Liz Taylor drag queen saying I'm the most beautiful woman in the world. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we're not allowed to call people out for the way they look, even when they're using the way they look as a tool to shut us up. Let me give you an example. We're going to listen to a short video from the actor John Leguizamo. Kevin, let's roll that. Let's listen to that.
Yo, what's up? Now, why is it that the people who cry, but you're erasing our history, when a racist statue comes down, are the same people who don't want critical race theory taught in school? What they're really saying, though, is they only want to keep the pieces of history that they can use to intimidate black people, okay? Let's get that right, because the Confederate flag wasn't even the official flag of the Confederacy. The official flag of the Confederacy was just a blockier version the U.S. flag. The Confederate flag we know today didn't come into wide use until the 1940s, when they used it as a symbol to protest civil rights. They displayed it to support Jim Crow. The Confederate flag means you want black people to be slaves. It should not be displayed. It's not erasing history. It's erasing public displays of hatred. Plus, no country in the world, in the history of the world, has put up statues to losers, to traitors.
Okay. The content of what he's saying is less important than actually the way he looked. And for those of you who can't see this, you're just going to have to trust me that I'm describing this right. He looked rough. He looked like he hadn't slept. He didn't actually look healthy. The set of his eyes, the way his skin was sitting on his face, he doesn't look healthy. He looks greasy. His hair doesn't look like it's been combed. His eyes are bloodshot. The tissue around his eyes and the eyelids is really red and looks a little bit swollen. He looks like he's high on weed, or he's been on a bender and he hasn't slept in a few days. He just looks greasy and unwell. Let's put up the tweet from my friend Carrie Smith, who co-hosts the podcast Unsafe Space. This is what she had to say about it. I'll read it to you. Carrie says, he doesn't look well. Yes, I realize I'm commenting on his appearance. It's an observation I'm allowed to have. It's not an argument. And then she goes on to talk about her disagreement with the substance of what like Osama was saying. But I want to focus on the fact that Carrie felt that she had to pre-defend what she was saying. And she does. She's right about that. People will come and say, that's looksism, lookism. You're commenting on their looks. Whenever you do that, you've lost the argument. You're just name calling, you're insulting, you're ad hominem. No. When people look like they're on drugs, like they haven't slept for a few days, like they're not at their best, sometimes that's an indication that they are on drugs, that they're not well, and that they haven't slept in a few days. Sometimes these things actually affect people's mentation. It affects the kinds of things they say. But we're not allowed to talk about that because anybody who's a fan is going to accuse us of lookism. That's a defense. It's an illegitimate defense. I want to show you another example. James Lindsay, the mathematician who's actually become one of the most important people in the country right now, fighting critical race theory and the adoption of critical race theory in American public schools, and who gets so much stick for telling the truth and pulling the curtain back on these people, did a really hysterically funny series of tweets about Nicole Hannah-Jones. Nicole Hannah-Jones is the reporter from the New York Times who came up with the 1619 Project, the idea that the real founding of this country was not 1776, it was 1619 when the first slaves came off a ship into the New World. She's a race baiter. She sees racism everywhere. She makes her money on racism. She makes her fame on racism. She feeds her ego on finding racism everywhere. And he did this really funny set of tweets where he used the language that critical race theory people use, but he just substituted something else. He's been calling her a clown, and she is a clown. She's an intellectual clown, but you know what else she is? She also looks like a clown. This is a woman, and I know some of you can't see this. It's fine. She can do this, but we can notice. She's picked a really unnatural shade of red in her hair. It's bright and loud and in your face. It's almost like it's the coloration you see on poisonous tree frogs, right? So many of these people look like they're adopting colors that when they occur in nature, they say, this plant is toxic, this toad is poisonous. And again, because the visual is part of the image here, and she's wearing this shade of red lipstick that so clashes with her hair that you have to think she just wants people to look at her. She is screaming, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And that's fine. But we don't have to pretend she's not doing this. So James says, clown fragility is a series of rhetorical maneuvers deployed by clowns to avoid engaging with the true fact of their clownery. Most clowns have not developed the necessary clown humility or clown stamina to long endure exposure of their clown tactics. Thus, they tend to lash out. The reason this is so funny is this is exactly what the critical race theory people say about white people. Just take the word clown out and insert white instead, and that's what we're talking about. And of course, Nicole Hannah-Jones is hiding behind the easy. She wants people to feel sorry for her, so she's pretending that she doesn't understand that James is turning her own words against her. She's pretending that he's going after her looks and that she's hurt by that because this is what misogynistic men do. Notice this tactic. So here's what she says in response. I don't know what type of human thinks this is cool, but what I will say is I hope he resolved whatever ego he was trying to stroke or insecurity he was trying to address by inviting people to insult me for my looks. Oh, piss off, you big phony. More in sorrow than in anger. She's loving this. He's not going after her for her looks. First of all, there's an implication there. The implication is that somebody's been insulting her because of the natural features of her face. Nobody's talking about whether her facial features are beautiful or not. They're talking about her ridiculous, conscious, artificial style choices, first of all. But really, more about the content of what she's saying. But this passes over real well. This gets every lefty, and it especially gets lefty women. They are so primed to believe that women are constantly being policed for their looks. They're either whores or saints, and that they can't possibly please anybody. And if they make pretty, then people won't appreciate them. But if they don't make pretty, they're called ugly. It's really over-egged. She goes on. Then we're going to wrap up after this. Nicole Hannah-Jones, who calls herself, by the way, Ida Bay Wells as a Twitter name. Ida B. Wells is the name of the first famous black investigative journalist. She calls herself Ida Bay Wells. Like, we can't all see the egotism in this. So she says, y'all have no idea what my inbox looks like on a daily basis because of how the right writes and tweets about me. And I know this site brings out the utter worst in people, but I somehow still have the ability to be shocked by how debased some of us are. And let's be clear, this is unprovoked. I didn't tweet at him or about him. Okay, honey. You know, sometimes mockery's the point. There are a lot of ideas that are worth mocking, and there are a lot of people who are worth mocking. And yes, when they use their artificial protective coloration to defend themselves against mocking, they should be mocked for their ridiculous artificial coloration for their theater. Come back after the break, and we're going to get into my interview with my very good friend, George Zamarripa. See you then.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back to Disaffected Friends, and make sure you spell it right with a little apostrophe there. We have a treat today yet again. Joining us is my very good friend, George Zamarripa. George is a friend that I made way back when we both went to Sarah Lawrence College. And I've been dying to get him on the show because he's absolutely hysterical, but also because we have been through many of the same formative political experiences, cultural experiences. We both went, as I said, we both went to Sarah Lawrence College. In those days, we were, I'll let George describe, where he is politically for himself, but we both started in similar political places. We studied post-structuralism, French philosophy, post-structural sociology, anthropology, queer theory. And as anybody who's watched the show knows, the world looks very different to me today than it did when I was a much younger man, and I think that's true for George too. So George, thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you so much, Josh, for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been really looking forward to this for quite some time.
And I think I should warn listeners that, as is true for friendships that happen between gay men like us, ours is mainly based on 1970s Palmolive commercials and the script for Mommy Dearest. So there may be at certain points where we have to stop and translate for you. We'll try not to do as many inside jokes, but it's going to be difficult. So let's just have fun. So tell me, George, what are you most disaffected about?
That's a good question because it's a lot. I'm like, Jesus, where do I begin?
Let me get an extra plate.
I think that, right. I think if I could sum it up, I think what I'm most disaffected by is just the inability. I don't know if it's an inability or if it's more of a or if people know about it and they're just, consciously doing it. The desire to just not want to tell the truth, or to talk about the truth. We're living in a world now where we have literally gone down the rabbit hole of a lot of the stuff that, as you mentioned earlier, we studied. We've gone around the rabbit hole of post-structural thought, in that, there's no truth with a capital T. It's just my truth. And lived experiences, and and I'm not this. You talk a lot about splitting. I'm not this person that's trying to do that. I try to be as reflective of what I do and what I think is possible. But I do find that there's just so much inability to have nuanced conversations where we can say, it's not all this and it's not all that. It's somewhere, we need to be able to have this conversation in the middle and talk about the fact that there are some things that are true on both sides of these arguments. That's what I'm saying.
Right. It's interesting because, as I think you're right, it's a radical subjectivity, really, isn't it? It's it's solipsism, actually. It's such a radical subjectivity that it often goes all the way into solipsism, as if the only thing that we're actually real is the truth as it appears to you, an individual. And I find there's so many contradictions. We don't want to tell the truth. We don't want to say uncomfortable things. But aren't we constantly telling each other and everybody else that we're all being especially authentic? Right? We say, I'm being authentic, or, this is the real me, this, that, and the other thing. And there are very few real me's happening anywhere, very few real conversations, very few things that strike me as genuinely authentic, yet we seem to have to frantically tell people that that's what we're doing.
Well, yes, it's authenticity with a trademark symbol behind it. It's performative. It's not actual authenticity. If we want to actually get authentic, we have to do it like what we're doing. We have to do it in a closed space, or as they would, the common phrase now, a safe space to be able to have these conversations. You can't just have this, with your group of friends down at the bar, after work, because you don't know who you're going to offend. You don't know who is literally just going to drop a bomb on you, like, what are you talking about? How could you use that word? Or how could you say this? I mean, it's literally like walking a tightrope.
Yes. Yeah, it's walking a tightrope, and it's 10 stories down, and there are daggers embedded in the sidewalk. If you slip, that's it.
Correct.
You're done for. You're canceled.
Correct.
I was thinking I should have clipped this. You may have seen this, but let me just explain it. There was a story this week on the journalist Barry Weiss's Substack, the spot online where people are setting up paid newsletters, where a lot of former mainstream journalists like Glenn Greenwald, Barry Weiss, formerly of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, have set up a shop on there because they're not allowed to actually write candid, truthful analyses for any of the legacy media. And there was a story Barry Weiss ran this week, and I think she hosted a story by the former Seattle Stranger journalist Katie Herzog about a medical school where one of the lecturers actually apologized to the class for having said offensive words. And the offensive words that he was apologizing for saying were pregnant woman. Pregnant woman. And he went on for several sentences apologizing for the fact that he didn't mean to be offensive or insensitive for saying the word pregnant woman. And I think the clincher that really got me from the quote was, I realize that being offensive is the worst thing I could do as a human being. Did you see that?
No, I did not hear about this, but I mean, I'm not surprised. We're not surprised, right, that this is happening. I mean, literally, it's like people are clamoring to apologize for anything nowadays. I mean, I actually think that we're at a point now where, like, I don't actually have to do anything. I can just make up something and just do a video apologizing for it. I mean, it's not even in the doing of the action. It's the apology. It's like, I'm just going to go on an apology tour.
Exactly. You expect to, turn on the radio or something. Yeah. Taking a break from her tour, Beyonce dropped a new apology this morning.
Exactly. Exactly. My apology is, number one on the apology charts on iTunes.
I know. Exactly. Subscribe now.
So, it's funny, that you and I have talked about Trixie and Katya many times, and they do a
tell the audience who those fine ladies are.
Yes. So Trixie Mattel and Katya Zamolodchikova are two drag queens who do a show on YouTube for World of Wonder Network. They are actual former contestants of RuPaul's Drag Race, and they became, people kind of knew them from that show, but neither of them won, but they became friends, and they kind of went on to do this show called
That's for those of you listening, that's actually the name of the show. Can you spell it, George?
Yes, it's literally UNHHHH. That is the title of the show.
Because it's their show, not ours.
That's right. And it's but yeah, so they actually make jokes about it all the time, where they're like, they make jokes about the idea of like being social media stars and how, like, when are we going to get canceled? Like, when do we get to do our apology video? Like, they're like, I love watching those videos where, like, they're like, you'll turn a video on and some Instagram influencer or something is like, I really hate having to make this video today. I'm really, really sad. And it's true. They all make these videos, and it's just hysterical because
I hate it so much.
Yes, exactly. And it's this was the hardest day of my life. It's just so ridiculous. And what's sad about this is that people are watching this as if it's like real, as if it's not obviously scripted or obviously made up, as if, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter are not all just communication channels for brands, whether your brand is, Nestle or your brand is George Zamarripa.
Right. Now with chunks.
Exactly. Fun for the whole family.
One of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show, I mean, aside from killing time and not having to prepare for this segment, is that, you know, one of the most difficult things about the past, at least 5 years, is and this is not unique to me. I've talked to a lot of people that feel this way, is how alienated one feels from social circles, groups of friends, real friends. We find ourselves at odds with people in ways that we never would have predicted, right? So a lot of people have experiences like this when they have changed their mind about politics. Particularly, I mean, right now we're living in an era where people are moving away from the left, the progressive left, the liberal left, or at least that's the world that I'm a part of, and are being shunned by their friends as a result of it. Those of us who think that the left has gone too far, that the guardrails have come off, that there's nothing too ridiculous or too extreme to claim is now a human right. You lose friendships over it, and you have people that you've known for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years looking at you like you're crazy, or actually telling you that they think you're crazy. You've lost your mind. You've lost your moral compass. And, you know, I've certainly experienced a lot of that. But I remember talking, you know, well, you and I have talked to each other for years and years and years, but I remember talking to you and your husband, Clay, maybe a year ago, and then again 6 months ago when I started doing the show with Kevin. And you said, you know, I think this is really interesting. I like the approach. I like the focus, but I'm not there with you on this, or I'm not there with you on this. I think you're going too far with this, or, you know, I think that's exaggerated, which is fine. And actually, if there are places where, you know, our analyses on these things do not match up with each other, we should talk about that too. But I have to say, it's been gratifying that, you know, you and Clay and I have talked again many times since then. And the two of you have said, you know, I can see it now. I see why you're saying this. I see why you feel this way. And it's, I mean, I kind of live for that, because I've had so many times that people have said, you know, I think this is nuts. I don't understand why you look at it this way. It's not as frequent that people say, now I understand it. What do you think about this? What has changed for you in terms of looking at traditional leftist politics, whether we're talking about sexualities, gender identity, race and racism, class issues? How would you say that your thinking has evolved or changed over the past 5 years?
That's a really good question. And yes, you're right. First of all, I just want to say it's I'm glad that it's gratifying to you that you hear that. I will say, for me, it's been like, it's hard to unlearn things that are just kind of second nature to you to believe, or to think. You know, having gone to Sarah Lawrence and done the work that we did, this was just second nature to me. A lot of stuff. But for me, it's, you know, I think a lot of it has come for me from just living my life as an out gay man, who has, you know, who has a steady job, who pays his taxes, who, you know, has a husband, and we just kind of live our, for lack of a better term, normal life, you know, and I'm kind of, for me, it's been sitting by and watching things change, and just noticing as I get older how a lot of the things that I just kind of, well, you know, took as gospel, for lack of a better term, of course that's real, you know, you know, particularly with gay men. Like I'll say, for example, the sexual liberation and freedom of wrapped up in gay, in our identities, and
Yeah.
that buttressed really the gay rights movement for up to now. I think, you know, I'm starting to really look at a lot of those things and go, is that liberation? Is that freedom? Because all I'm seeing is a lot of people who are really unhappy, who are damaged, who are not nice people. And I hate that word nice, but not what I would say, not kind people.
Yeah.
And I think what I find most disturbing for me is that if there's something that I see in my character or in myself, I want to know what it is that's driving me or making me rethink something. And I think that's what disturbs me is I don't think people, at least gay men, I don't think they care. I don't think that they actually look at things and say, you know, maybe that behavior is not that good. Maybe, you know, and you can't have a conversation about these things. That's what's frustrating, is you can't have a conversation about these things because then you're homophobic. You're internalizing your homophobia. I'm telling you right now, I don't have internalized homophobia. I am an out and proud gay man, and I'm not trying to hide nothing. Okay. And that's what I think is so ridiculous about this is it's like, no, it's not. That's not the issue here. The issue here is an inability to have a conversation about thoughts and behaviors that are not in your best interest, whether that be, and I'm not talking politically, I'm talking about health wise, you know, as Clay likes to say, you know, when we talk about fetishes and things like that, if you can only come by getting hit by a 1982 Ford Focus, you might want to talk to somebody about that.
I'm sorry. Oh God, I just snorted.
That could be a, you know, call me crazy. That might be an issue. You might want to look into that.
Yeah. Well, you know, honey, there's more problems with that than just what appears on the surface because the Ford Focus wasn't made in 1982. I think these people might actually need an escort.
Oh, of course. I know nothing. I know nothing about cars. So I'm just like, whatever. Yes, you're right. It's a Ford Escort. Correct. Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's what you're talking about there is I'm sorry. Oh boy. What you're talking about there in terms of the idea that it's the idea in gay male culture for at least the latter half of the 20th century forward to today has been that the highest self you can achieve, the highest happiness, the highest freedom that you can achieve is through what we call sexual liberation, but what I think any fair-minded person would call hedonism or libertinism, right?
Yes.
Not just I'm free to love who I want, I'm free to have sex with who I want, but that I'm not free and I'm not self-actualized unless I'm a huge whore. Right?
Well,
and you know,
correct. Unless I'm practicing behaviors that for anybody else in any other circumstance, somebody would be like, are you sure that's smart?
right.
I mean, that's what and that goes back to what I was talking about earlier about we just don't want to tell the truth to each other. We don't want to have these conversations. And I've been saying inconvenient truth a lot lately because that's what it is,
Mm-hmm.
because it undermines our identity politics, right? And all the,
Yep.
you know, quote unquote, you know, bullshit that's wrapped up with it.
Yeah, and while it's more extreme I mean, I've talked about this on recent episodes of the show. You and I have talked about this privately. Look at what gay pride, well, it's not even gay pride anymore, is it? I mean, first of all, they took the word gay away. We all should have clued into that when that happened a few years ago. It passed me by. I didn't notice it. I don't know why, but I didn't. But do you notice that about 5-6 years ago, you didn't hear gay pride anymore? You just heard pride. You didn't see the words gay pride written anymore. You just saw the word pride. It's like they just disappeared the word.
Correct.
And we've talked about how pride celebrations now are literally just fetish parades. There's sex happening out on the street. People are walking around in bondage and fetish gear. People are urinating on each other. All manner of hedonistic, over the top acting out. But the truth is, it's not as if this just happened overnight. This came out of, we set the stage for this. We gay men, look at our bathhouse culture. That's been at least since the mid-20th century. Look at our culture. The English call it cottaging. When you have sex out in the bushes. We in the United States, gay men call it cruising. You cruise the parks, cruise the bushes looking for a trick, looking for somebody to pick up. And then the huge bathhouse culture of the 1970s. And bathhouse is just a euphemism for, an all-you-can-eat brothel, basically.
All you can eat.
I mean, it's self-service. You don't get a waitress. You have to serve yourself. But, excuse me. It's a little bit like, what was that sushi place you took me to where it's like revolving sushi where these plates come by. It's like that trolley on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Ding, ding, ding. A little crab thing goes by. What is that called?
It's just revolving sushi, yeah.
Okay, well, the bathhouses are like that, except you're the conveyor belt. If somebody wants some of you, they like what they see, they just pick you up and put you on their table.
Exactly. The problem nowadays is if I were to go to a bathhouse and get on the thing, I'd be that lonely bowl of like cuttlefish that nobody wants that would just keep going around.
I know. Till you're sitting there just sort of like,
Exactly.
It'll just be you and the uni.
Too.
I know. But the AIDS crisis, for example, people don't like to say this because it sounds mean, but we brought this on ourselves.
We did.
We brought this on ourselves with our own behavior. And for the benefit of anybody in the audience right now who's never heard gay men speak about it that way, I do want to be clear about something. I watched friends die of AIDS. George has a brother who died of AIDS in the 1990s. Yep. It's not pleasant. It's not fun. And it decimated a generation of gay men. And I'm not in any way trying to express, oh, you deserved that. It was good that you died that way. Of course, that's not what I mean. But in our inability, I think, gay men's inability to act in adult ways and to think about our responsibilities and what other people's responsibilities are in an adult way, I think our communities spend a lot of time blaming outside forces for things that we were doing to ourselves, blaming the presidential administration for not combating the AIDS crisis sooner, blaming the medical industry for not coming up with something sooner. And there certainly were ways in which the government did not direct research dollars to medical treatment maybe as quickly as they would have if it were, quote, normal people. But the base responsibility here was us, our promiscuous culture, our culture of having unprotected anonymous sex with, I was going to say dozens, but it's not dozens, it's hundreds and hundreds of people. And I heard very little talk about our responsibility for doing this to ourselves. What does it look like to you?
I think that's exactly correct. And again, and I really, this is one of the things I dislike about having, when we have these conversations. I dislike the fact that you have to couch the conversation with, of course, I'm not blaming somebody for dying so young. It's a tragedy. It's awful. Yes, more things could have been done. Yes, the administration at that time, or the two administrations at that time, yes, they have a lot of blood on their hands. There are a lot of things that could have happened and should have happened. I definitely think there's an argument there. The problem nowadays is we can't have the conversation where two things can be true at the same time. And
Right.
It's the splitting, right? It's all good, all bad. That is just not the case. And again, I'm saying this as somebody who's a gay man who has had his share of intimate encounters, shall we say. I know. I should be it's like a Calgon commercial.
I know. Or a tryst in the ladies' underwear department of a J.C. Penney. Where's George? Oh, you'll find him back in intimates.
Exactly. But yeah, again, I did have a brother who died very young of HIV related illness, and it's very sad. And as a young gay man who was 16 when he died, it was only recently where I really kind of, I was upset about it, and then that kind of fueled me to do a lot of my own work in terms of, I came out of the closet that summer after my brother died of AIDS. And it's so funny because I remember at the time
anybody didn't know.
Say that again?
Sorry, we have a little bit of a delay, and I was talking over you, but I was just saying, yeah, as if everybody didn't already know.
Right, exactly.
You came out of the closet to yourself, honey.
Exactly. Self-confessed. No, it's like, yeah, you were performing Vogue for like grade schools. People knew. But getting back to what I was saying earlier. It wasn't until recently that I really started having these thoughts about what would it have been like for me to have an older gay brother, if he had been alive. What would our relationship have been like? It would, I feel robbed, it makes me sad when I think about it, because I miss him, and I really would have loved to have had an adult relationship with with my brother, where we had something like this, in like that, like being gay in common. But yes, getting back to what we talked about, what we were talking about. Yes, I think it's hard for us as gay men to admit that our behavior is self-destructive, or can be self-destructive.
Yep.
And,
yep.
I think I've told you this on some of our phone calls, but, my husband and I will often talk about things that we see from people on social media or stuff like that, other gay men, talking about their latest tryst, or this, that, or the other, or things that they're into. And I can't tell you how many times I've turned to him after we've read something, and I'll just say, she don't love herself.
Well, it's true though. That's the paradox. That's the paradox of narcissism, of vaingloriousness, of what looks on the surface like an excess of self-confidence, an excess of pride.
Yes.
An excess of vanity. I didn't used to believe this, but but I do now. I think it's true. To the degree that you see that excess, you're seeing the degree of ego weakness in somebody. That's not a true expression of what's happening underneath the surface in that person. It's a defensive reaction. It's a mask of the opposite, right? Because people who need that kind of validation, need to be seen as the prettiest, need to be seen as the most clever, need to be seen as the most desirable, are usually the people who don't think that they have any of those attributes to begin with.
Right. And I think that one thing that a lot of this behavior can be summed up in is a lack of boundaries.
Yes.
And I know you've talked about this on the show, and we've talked about this, but I find myself doing this almost on a daily basis now, where I'll read a story about, and I can't pull anything out of my head right now, but I'll read a story or I'll see a tweet, and I'll be like, how is that even possible? And the minute I say, how is that even possible, I go, well, of course it's possible, because we have no boundaries anymore. People don't have boundaries because it is a terrible thing to actually have boundaries nowadays, or to expect that people should have them or should pay attention to yours.
Yep.
You know, and so much behavior, even if we just get down to like silly things, you know, every day, like just the way we interact with each other, things that we would never think of saying or doing to somebody that we didn't know, a stranger on the street. Now people just feel entitled to say things, do things, treat people however they want to, because we are living in a world where there are no boundaries anymore. And nobody thinks that people should, you know, that there's a baseline for how you should treat people, you know, just a baseline.
Yep. Well, we see, yes. Yeah, there are no boundaries. And also there are very few standards anymore. People aren't expected to adhere to basic agreed upon etiquette rules. I mean, it could be anything from, I mean, I see it in everything. The lack of eye contact when you go into a store anymore, especially if the people are one or two generations younger than us. And this frustrates me about this conversation. I have to say this to sort of get it out there. I shouldn't have to say it, but I do have to say it. Yes, I know. Every person who's older says this about the younger generation. I hear you and I acknowledge that. But I guess what I would say is to anybody who wants to sort of interject that back is, I ask you to be able to hear that there is actually a change here that's not just getting older and becoming more grumpy, that older people are actually seeing something real. We're not just displeased that the world doesn't look like it looked when we were kids. You go into stores and you don't get eye contact from the cashiers. They don't say hello. They don't look at you. They're often either they're talking to a coworker over their shoulder. It's sort of like, you know, just pick the thing up, put it over the scanner. Yeah, well, this weekend we were going to go out, but our car's in the shop. You know what I mean? It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's a sort of aloof rudeness. People don't know how to take turns at four-way stops in cars any longer. It's just people act as if it's an imposition on them to have etiquette, right? To have rules like generally you walk on the right side of the street. Or do you know what I'm talking about? I know they're like little small picky things, but I see this seeping into everything. No rules, no boundaries.
Absolutely, Josh. I absolutely see this. I see it every day, and like I was saying, how we treat each other, just strangers on the street, you know, and just this sort of lack of basic like human decency, you know, or the idea that, you know, maybe somebody doesn't want to listen to your one-sided cell phone conversation while they're having dinner. Maybe somebody doesn't,
right.
You know, maybe somebody doesn't, you know, or in the bus, you know, like in an enclosed space. Maybe somebody doesn't want to listen to your YouTube video that you decide to watch out in the open while we're riding the train tour.
Yeah. When did that start happening? When did people it's so common nowadays. When did it occur to people, oh, I don't have to wear headphones. I can just watch TV right out in public on the bus. It doesn't matter what other people think. I can just have my show playing so everyone has to hear it. What happened?
I don't know. And I don't have an answer. All I know is that I have noticed this erosion of etiquette. I've noticed an erosion of boundaries, and it is not good. I mean, you and I have talked many times about, how much we like Miss Manners and why, and Miss Manners' explanation of why we have etiquette, right? We have etiquette because we have to live together in a society. In order to do it without killing each other, we have to have some sort of base etiquette in order for us to get through life living with each other.
Yep.
And yeah, there's a social contract that just seems to be being like either lit on fire or ripped up piece by piece as we move forward. And to take it back to, pride, I'm embarrassed by a lot of the things that I used to carry water for, and you and I have talked about this.
Like what? Give some examples.
Well, I mean, the idea, and I see it nowadays, Pride is our day. And if you don't like what we're doing, then just don't go there. It's not meant for families, or it's not meant for this, or it's not meant for that. There was a time that I would have agreed with that. And
yeah, me too.
And now I'm like, it's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable for people to feel that they should be able to go out during the weekend of Pride if they're not involved with it, and be able to drive by on their way to the grocery store or whatever and not see two grown men out on the street having sex with each other. That's not an unreasonable ask. Okay. And I think that's where people get frustrated. And that's where, again, I'm having this thing where like two things can be true at the same time, right? Yes, it's great to be able to celebrate liberation and to have those, to have a day where you can do that. There should also be boundaries. You should also be able to do that in the context of the community that you live in without offending people. And of course, the people will come in, you'll also have the LGBT, as I like to call them, the alphabet mafia. You'll have the alphabet mafia come in and say, well, that's just the thing. They think that our existence is offensive, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, if somebody...
No.
Well, here's the thing. If somebody thinks your existence is offensive, I'm not taught. I mean, first of all, those number of people...
Well, check. Look in the mirror. Is your existence offensive? It might be. Have you looked? I mean, some of the faces on these people could stop a train.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up, because that's another thing of like an erosion, right? Where it's couched in like, things like body positivity or, and being authentic, right? I'm just being authentic by dyeing my hair 27 different colors of manic panic, and piercing everything on my body. And that's the thing. Like, I'm not this person who's sitting here saying, you can't do that. You can do whatever the hell you want. I don't care. But you can't say, I'm going to do all these things and then get mad when you go out on the street and people stare at you. Hello?
Well, I know. We're sort of schizophrenic about it, too, because you were talking a few minutes ago about how you might have said, hey, this is our day. We can do what I want. It's not for families. And that's, I was along with that, too. I used to think that way as well. But today, not only do people say that, but they go further. They, it's like that article that was in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago that I talked about, I think on the last episode of this show. This mother who said, yes, kink belongs at Pride, and yes, I want my kids to see it. It's not enough anymore for us to have our space and defend the boundaries of our space. We have to get up in people's faces and say, and I'm dragging you into my space too. Look at it. Open your eyes and look at it. I want you to see this. Look, look, look.
Correct.
It's not enough for people to say, no, thank you. We won't accept it.
Correct. And again, I go back to no boundaries. This is exactly correct. And I think that that's why we're seeing an erosion of, if I can, I'm going to be accused of being separatist here, but gays and lesbians, at least us, what I would define as gay and lesbian, we're no longer, this is no longer, like you said, this isn't gay pride. This isn't whatever. This is queer pride. This is queer pride.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not on the queer train, you are not invited. You have been disinvited from your own party. And that's how I see it. That's why, 2 years ago, I believe it was, when my husband and I decided to go down to Gay Pride, and walked around. We were there for about an hour before we just looked at each other and said, we don't belong here. This is not us. This is not who we are.
Right.
And we got in our car and left. And on the way home, we were literally saying, I think I'm done. I don't think I'm ever going to go back again. Of course, I didn't need very much of an excuse, because I'm like, it is too freaking hot out here. I don't want to be out in this heat.
I know, it's ridiculous.
I'm like, if I could lay on a couch and have someone like push me around, Pride, maybe that would be
I need to get you one of those mobility scooters.
Oh, God.
So you can be a rascal on your little rascal. If you're too young to get that reference, Google it.
I know. On a hover round. Isn't that what that's the other one?
I know. I'm actually going to have to give a whole bunch of links in the show notes, because anybody under the age of probably 40 listening to the opening of this segment is going to say, what's a Palmolive? Who's Madge?
You know what? And here's my thing. If you don't know what those are, guess what? Google's your friend.
Exactly.
And this is a message to anybody out there who is gay or lesbian, anybody who may be watching this. Know your history. Know your references. Know things. They come from places. It's okay to ask, but you can look things up. And I'm saying this because for some reason, and I blame, again, we always talk about blaming social media for everything, but this is one thing I really do sort of blame on the internet age. For some reason, young people have no desire to know about anything, thoughts, ideas, films, anything cultural that didn't happen before the day they were born.
Yep.
Literally, the world started the moment they came out of their mother's vaginas. That's when the world started. And anything before that is like a void. Like,
it's weird.
It is.
It's weird because all young people are a little solipsistic that way. We're all like that. But I don't think it used to be as bad as this. I knew that there was a world that was there before I was born. It was something I saw my mother's generation talk about. I saw it in pictures. I mean, it's, hey, there is a recent past, but you're right. They don't care, but on some level, it almost seems like they don't really believe there was a world before they came along. And so they're open. They're able to be fooled about these things. I mean, you and Clay have said this before that in some sense, people like us are the last gay generation. What do you mean by that? I know what you mean, but it's such an interesting idea. I'd like you to explain it for the people who are listening.
Well, I think that I I don't want to fall into the left's trap of, well, I can only speak for myself. But you know, we used to be able to have a conversation about, when I said the words gay culture to gay men of our age and older, you understood what that meant. And what that meant was we had sort of a shared knowledge base of cultural references, music, things like that. We may not necessarily all like the same things, but we at least knew what they were, and we knew people. We understood what you were talking about when you said no wire hangers ever. You may not have necessarily seen Mommy Dearest, but you know what Mommy Dearest.
But you knew.
You know the reference. You know
Yep.
When somebody said, but you are in that chair, Blanche. You are, and you're never going to leave it either. You knew that was Betty Davis and Joan Crawford.
Yep.
And there again, it was a shared sort of. It was a thing that made us a community, right? Humans are attracted to groups where they can have that sort of shared experience.
Yeah.
You see it in religious groups, right? That's why religion is popular. There's a shared belief. Anyway, when I say that we're the last gay generation, what I mean is I can't tell you how many young people I've met who all make a reference like that, and they're like, I don't know what that is. And
I know.
And they say it in that way, as in like, oh, that's just old. That's just It's not the newfangled thing. And
there's sort of there's an implication there in the way that people say that when they express something like that. It's not stated, but I think it's pretty heavily implied. Why would you even think to say that to me? You should be a little embarrassed to think I would care.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's not just I don't know that. It's I'm expressing disapproval that you expected me to know that.
Correct. I think that's absolutely true. I also think that, again, to go back to when I was, in my teens and, knew that I was gay, and I had a natural curiosity. To want to know more about who I was, what lied ahead for me as an adult gay man. What could I expect in my community, and I wanted to know more about gay people and gay culture. I wanted to know about those things. So when I started reading things, in magazines and books, or hearing about things, I wanted to know it. I couldn't wait to get Paris is Burning and watch Paris is Burning. I couldn't wait to get a hold of anything that could, I'm going to use one, a leftist term, that could validate me as a gay man.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I couldn't wait to watch a film, with Judy Garland in it, so I could figure out why did gay men love Judy Garland? Why did they love Joan and Betty and countless other things? I just had that natural curiosity. And I just don't see that existing nowadays. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the old man sitting on his grass going, get off my lawn, or the good old days. I don't think I am.
I don't think so either. I think it's very easy. It's very easy to say that. We all said it about older people when we were that age. All young people act that way. All older people act that way. But there is something quantitatively and qualitatively different about it today. I do think it's not just the normal disconnection between generations as one set of cultural symbols, music, actors and actresses, cultural touchstones, they give way to new ones over time. That's normal and natural. It's not just that normal giving way. There is a hostility to the existence of anything prior to this generation, and this generation expresses that hostility. And they may not even be completely conscious of it. In fact, I think a lot of them would probably be surprised and maybe a little bit angry if you suggested that, hey, you're pushing this away deliberately, right? You're shitting on it. They'd probably be surprised, like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Well, yes, you are. And I think it's the same thing that drives this generation, not just to disappear what happened before it, but to actually replace us. This is a generation that is literally rewriting history the way they used to airbrush things out of photos with Stalin. Like the Soviet Union used to airbrush people out of official photographs. They're doing it with gay pride. They're doing it with the Stonewall riot in 1969. This myth that black trans women of color are why gays have gay rights, because it was black trans women of color, and they do use that awful, belabored, ugly way of expressing it. It isn't true.
It isn't.
It was not a black trans woman who threw the first brick there. And these people they're talking about, there was no such thing as a trans woman in 2021 terms back then. They're drag queens. Marsha P. Johnson was a guy who was a drag queen, and he said, I'm a guy who's a drag queen. So even the people that they're trying to claim, that they're trying to put into these newfangled avatars for gay history, would, have actually said on the record, I'm not that person. They don't care.
Right. But again, and we're, this is revisionist history, right? This is,
Yep.
And I think you're right when you say being erased. And I hate to use that term because it sounds so, it's the term that the left and progressive left in particular loves to use. It's a grievance term, right?
Yep.
And it's a loaded term. And that's the other thing that I dislike about a lot of things coming in, is that there are certain words that make sense when you use them in a certain context, but because they've become so loaded, you don't feel like you can use them anymore. Anyway.
Yeah.
So erased. Yeah. I think it goes back again to being disinvited. We're being disinvited from our own history, from our own party, from our own struggle. And this is the thing too. I don't really care what other gay men do in their life. When I say I don't really care, what I mean is, screw up your life all you want. If you don't want to deal with your issues and you want to relive your trauma through your fetish, because that's exactly what fetish is.
Amen.
Again, it's an inconvenient truth.
Yep.
If you want to do that, fine, do it. But let's not pretend that that's not what you're doing. You're not seeking your liberation by harming yourself or and you're not going to force me to say, that's fantastic, that's wonderful, do you go girl. I'm not going to do it.
Yep. Yeah, I know. Well, it is. It's enforced cheering. God, we could go on for a long, long time, and you're going to have to come back on the show, because we started opening up some topics as we get to the end of this segment that I think we could really dive pretty deeply into. But we have gone on for a while, and George, thank you. I hope that, well, you've given me a lot to laugh about this week, and it's been difficult to get a laugh out of me because I found everything irritating about the world this week, and I hope that it's been as fun for people watching. So thanks for sitting down to talk with us, and I'm going to have you on again for the next time we talk about gay shit, okay?
Oh, please. I am always willing to come on and talk about gay shit. And if I could just say one more thing before we go, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. One thing I think that, and maybe we can dive into this the next time I'm on the show. One thing that I'm really tired of too is, and you hear it a lot in gay culture, actually in culture in general, is, God, you're so judgy.
Uh-huh.
You know what? I am judgmental. And I'll tell you why.
Yep.
I'm judgmental about anything that I think is untruthful, that I think, or that is false. Untruthful, is that even a word? That is, I'm judgmental about things that are blatantly false. I'm judgmental about behavior that is toxic. And as human beings, we couldn't make it through the world without a sense of judgment. You have to be able to
Yes.
judge people, relationships, things around you in order to keep yourself safe. That is just an innate function of being a human being. And to tell people that they shouldn't be judgy about something that they see and they know is wrong it's abusive as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is abusive. And it isn't just, you're right about all of that, but it isn't just restricted to humans. I mean, this is the basis of how organisms keep themselves safe and fed, right?
Right.
Cats make judgments about people. Dogs make judgments about people. When they decide whether or not they're going to come up and let you pet them, they're making judgments. You know, their dog judgments or their cat judgments or their horse judgments, but they are still, that seems like a safe person or that doesn't seem like a safe person. This is just normal animal behavior, right? And we're trying to pretend that excuse me, that there's something wrong with it. And I think that a lot of people who say these things don't mean to be doing this. I don't think they're consciously doing it, but they have been trained by abusers, because it was an abuser who came up with the idea to make judgment something questionable. The only person who would think of that out of thin air is somebody who has an interest in lowering your boundaries and lowering your defenses. By making the normal act of discriminating among various choices to see which is the safest, which is the healthiest, to morally problematize that shows you that somebody is trying to hurt somebody else. And they've convinced people to help them do it by lowering their defenses. So, yeah, we could go on and on, but we're going to have to wrap this segment up, as much as I don't want to. George, I'm going to have you on again really soon. Thank you very much for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. Anytime.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. So, I want to talk a little bit about narrative creation and narrative massaging. People who have objections, real substantive objections to the way we are dealing with the COVID-19 virus, our overreaction to the pandemic that's done terrible things to our economy, to people's jobs, to their states of mind. The legacy media, the corporate media, and particularly the liberal left media, do not want these to be legitimate topics of conversation. They do not want to acknowledge that there are people who have reasonable and legitimate differences of opinion over our approach about this. And they will go to some pretty extreme lengths to make these objections seem ridiculous. Another way that they sometimes do this is they take an example of somebody who does look like they have some lunatic beliefs, and then they try to extrapolate that person's lunacy and say that, well, that kind of lunacy is what animates anyone who's objecting to this. And I found a good example, a frustrating example, in the publication Vice. Yes, I know. What do you expect from Vice? I expect this, and I'm going to talk about it. This is an article about... Okay, so here's what the article alleges. The article claims to be about somebody they call Bill, not his real name. They claim that Bill is a survivor of the Parkland school shooting. You know, we've had many school shootings, the one that happened in Parkland. This is allegedly an account from Bill, who is a survivor of the Parkland school shooting, and about how his father has been treating him. I don't know if this is true. For the sake of this segment, I'm going to assume that this guy that they've given the name Bill to, I'm going to assume that he's telling the truth. I realize he may not be, but that's the assumption. So Bill says, let me read you a little bit from this. Bill's final semester at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida was already difficult enough. He was part of the final graduating class of the survivors of the 2018 shooting, and they had all just marked the third anniversary of the day 17 people were killed, 9 of whom were Bill's classmates. But Bill had to deal with his father's daily accusations that the shooting was a hoax and that the shooter, Bill, and all of his classmates were paid pawns in a grand conspiracy orchestrated by some shadowy force. Okay, so to the extent that this really happened to Bill and that Bill's telling the truth, it's a terrible situation. Can you imagine having a parent who actually told you that the school shooting that you went through and survived was a hoax and that you, his son, are a paid actor? That's insane, right? To the extent that this is true, well, assuming it's true, I feel really bad for Bill. But listen to this. Here's a quote from Bill. He'll say stuff like this straight to my face whenever he's drinking. Quote, "You're a real piece of work to be able to sit here and act like nothing ever happened if it wasn't a hoax. Shame on you for being part of it and putting your family through it too," Bill said about his father in an anonymous post on Reddit last week. Back to Vice. As is true for many who fell down the QAnon rabbit hole in recent years, Bill's dad's descent coincided with the pandemic. Bill says again, "It started a couple of months into the pandemic with the whole anti-lockdown protests," Bill said. "His feelings were so strong it turned into facts for him. So if he didn't like having to wear masks, it wouldn't matter what doctors or scientists said. Anything that contradicted his feelings was wrong. So he turned the internet to find like-minded people, which led him to QAnon." Let's tease this apart. Oh boy. It started a couple of months ago with the pandemic and with the whole anti-lockdown protests. Yeah, this past year and a half has driven a lot of us crazy. Lots of us, no matter where we are on the left to right spectrum, a lot of us have lost our minds a little bit. That's normal. Normal people go crazy in crazy times. But it's not the pandemic. To the extent that anybody is being pushed over the edge, it's not the pandemic doing it. It's not the virus doing it. It's our reaction to it. It's our public health officials talking out of both sides of their mouth. One day masks work, the next day they don't work. One day they're a good idea, the next they're absolutely essential if you're not going to murder people that you're standing in line next to. Everybody needs to get vaccinated. Oh, now all of a sudden if you're vaccinated you can still pass it, you need to mask back up. The CDC wants us to go back to wearing masks, even the people who are vaccinated indoors. We, citizens here, we are not the ones giving contradictory messages. We're the ones hearing them. But the way that Vice frames this is that the only people, they don't say it, of course, but that's the implication, that's the framing. The only people who object to masks are crazy people like Bill's drunken father. Crazy people who believe in crazy conspiracy theories and belong to cult-like groups like QAnon. How many people do you actually believe would call themselves QAnon supporters? A vanishingly tiny percentage of the population. There are many more of us out there who are objecting to the masks, who are objecting to the lockdowns, who are pointing to the fact that this is costing lives in suicide, it's costing livelihoods with economic destruction. We're not wrong about this, and we're not crazy, and we didn't learn it from QAnon. Back to the story. But until January, that was as far as it went. Then Bill's father saw a video of Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene harassing Parkland survivor David Hogg in 2018 while he was visiting Washington to advocate for stricter gun control. Greene has repeatedly voiced support for QAnon and claimed the Parkland shooting was a hoax. So we have to bring in Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's everybody's favorite whipping boy, regardless of the fact that she does say some things that are over the top and don't sound very believable. She's basically become a cultural piñata. Nothing she can say is right. Anybody who says anything, even in the neighborhood of anything she suggested, is automatically crazy. This is what they're doing. This story, if this story is real, this is not about the power of QAnon. It's not about the power of far right-wingers and Republicans. If it's true, Bill's father is a man who's already not in his right mind and obviously was not in his right mind a very long time before this. Normal people do not look at their children who went through a school shooting and suddenly claim that their children are lying, that the school shooting that their own child went through didn't happen, and that their child is a paid actor. That's not reflective of any political group. It's not reflective of any particular position on masking protocols or pandemic response. It's reflective of somebody who is seriously mentally unstable. We already see from Bill's description that his father is an alcoholic. That might be enough. He might be a severe enough alcoholic that his brain is actually pickled by drink. But alcoholism has a high coincidence with other mental health issues. All drug addictions do. If this is who Bill's father actually is, this is a Bill's father problem. This is a drug addiction problem and a mental illness problem. But this entire story is framed in such a way that anybody, we're equating somebody who's deluded enough to believe that his son is a paid crisis actor with people who object to masks, who object to mandatory vaccinations. I mean, it's just disgusting. But that's Vice. What about the Washington Post? What about the Washington Post, the respectable media? Jenifer Rubin, liberal America's favorite alleged conservative and alleged Republican. Jenifer Rubin is a nut job. She's not a conservative. She's not a Republican, in my view. In my view, she's unbalanced. And she's narcissistic. Jenifer Rubin is about Jenifer Rubin. And the reason why she's always getting a column in the Washington Post is because she says exactly what the left would like her to say about who she alleges her own party is. This week, she wrote an article trying to get the government to get stricter about mandatory vaccines. I pulled a lot of quotes here. Let's get to them. First one. You have to hand it to French President Emmanuel Macron. He refuses to allow defiant anti-vaxxers to put his country at risk for widespread illnesses and death from the Delta variant of the coronavirus. Folks, you all know right now the big scary Delta. What do you think is going to happen after Delta's gone? We're going to have the next one. Epsilon? Back to Jenifer Rubin. His approach of ordering health workers to get vaccinated by September 15th and telling the rest of the French population that they will be denied access to most indoor public venues if they're unvaccinated or without a negative test has prompted other countries, including Italy, to follow suit, even as it has stirred pockets of deep resistance, the New York Times reports. So she's setting us up here. Emmanuel Macron is a bold leader. In France, they don't want you to go inside bars, cultural venues. I think grocery stores are even on the list if you're unvaccinated. You don't find this scary? Huh? Next one from Miss Rubin. The results were stunning. Sure, some Frenchmen protested, but 3.7 million booked vaccine appointments in the first week after Macron's announcement and, quote, a record nearly 900,000 vaccinations in a single day on July 19th, end quote. Macron is saving lives and helping to restore his country's economy and mental health. Yeah. She lives in opposite land. Saving lives and restoring mental health with mandatory vaccinations and barring people from entering businesses that they need to actually sustain their lives if they refuse to take this vaccine. That's wonderful, isn't it? What more does she want? Meanwhile, in the United States, we are still pleading with the unpersuadables to stop listening to anti-vaccination cranks and risking their own lives and others around them, e.g. children not old enough to get the vaccine, those vulnerable to breakthrough infections. Polling suggests outreach will not get us far. Oh, this makes me so angry. Anti-vaccination cranks. For these people, for people like Jenifer Rubin, and I'm sorry, for most people on the left today, I hear this from acquaintances and friends with whom I have not discussed my views. I hear how they talk. Normal people are saying this. This isn't a few people on the left. This is the average everyday person on the left. Calling people who have questions about the vaccine or who don't think that the risk-benefit analysis works out in favor of getting the vaccine, we are anti-vaxxers now. We're cranks to these people. I have every single vaccination in my body that you have on the normal U.S. schedule of vaccinations. All of them, except this one. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a crank. And neither are any of the other people I know who are worried about this particular vaccine or who don't believe that the risk-benefit analysis comes out in favor of them getting the vaccine. But we're cranks. And we're unpersuadables. So she says polling outreach won't get us very far. Well, you know where that's going, don't you? She talks about a poll of all the people who haven't yet been vaccinated. Of the unvaccinated in a recent poll, 35% said they probably won't get it, and 45% said they definitely won't. We need to come to grips with the most recalcitrant 45% of the unvaccinated and to start showing that there are consequences to their self-destructive behavior. And she put in some parentheses, apart from illness and death. Consequences for their self-destructive behavior. Self-destructive or other destructive, Jenifer? What's the accusation? We're going to punish people now because they don't take care of themselves well enough? No. Well, yes, for her, yes. This is somebody who likes control. Jenifer Rubin's goal is control. She wants to be in the catbird seat. She wants to be giving orders. She wants to be seen as on the team with the CDC and the White House and anybody else who wants to enact an undue level of government and public health control over the actions of the population. That's what she wants. She wants vaccine. She's recommending vaccine passports for all federal property and transportation, public schools, kids, staff. That's what she thinks is a good idea. Whew. Next quote. Listen to this carefully. No one has a right to work in a way that places them at risk to others or themselves. Really? No one has a right to work in a way that places them at risk to others or themselves. Nobody's allowed to work on guy wires. Nobody's allowed to climb poles and replace telephone wires. Nobody can go down into cramped sewer spaces. No one can mine. I mean, it's just, you know, and no, don't tell me. Obviously, she didn't mean that. If she didn't mean that, she shouldn't have said it. She tells on herself. This is ridiculous. And she goes on. Conservatives of all people should realize private businesses have the right to run their operations as they see fit. Government should protect the private sector when it takes socially responsible actions. She doesn't mean what she's saying. Conservatives of all people should realize private businesses have the right to run their operations as they see fit. She's saying that she wants the government to protect private businesses who are getting pushback if that private business requires their workers or their customers to get a vaccine, because people are starting to say, is this legal? Are we really going to allow businesses to fire staff if they don't get vaccinated? Conservatives should know that government should protect those kinds of businesses, and they should have a right to run their operations as they see fit. But she is not allowing that for those who say we're not going to require vaccines. She does not believe that that is a legitimate decision for private business to make. She just phoned this in. I mean, she's not great to begin with, but this is really sloppy. Couple more. Some politicians are figuring it out. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio has begun to call on private businesses to require workers to be vaccinated and signaled that he would introduce similar measures for municipal employees. He should be applauded. Why isn't New York Governor Andrew D. Cuomo doing the same? But Jenifer, I thought private businesses have the right to run their operations as they see fit. Which is it? She leaves with this kicker. We should praise red state governors such as Alabama's Republican Governor Kay Ivey for expressing exasperation with the mass of her residents who won't get vaccinated, and then encourage her to mandate vaccinations at state facilities and at the very least urge Alabama employers to require their workers to get vaccinated. This is dangerously close to actually fascism, this cooperation and collusion between private business and government. That's what fascism is. It's getting dangerously close. And people like Jenifer Rubin are allowed to say this stuff. And when people like me point out the obvious, we are told that we're crazy. We are the ones who are speaking dangerous words. We are lunatics for using the word fascism. No, we're not. Jenifer Rubin and people like her want the government to harangue and cajole private businesses into punishing their employees and their customers who will not be vaccinated. That's what she wants. She does not think that private businesses should have a right to run their operations as they see fit. She just talks out of both sides of her mouth. It only goes in one direction for people like her. And the reaction to this is frightening. I have just one example here. I thought I'm not going to clip out 16 or 17 of these because it's not going to make for a good show. But now I sort of wish I had, because what I'm about to show you is a tiny drop in the bucket on social media of the kind of response that this is getting. This is a tweet in response from somebody named Stephen Pascal. I don't know who he is, which I'm sure he'd find very offensive because he has the coveted verified person Twitter blue check, but I have no clue who he is. This was his response. Enough is enough. We have to start making it painful for those who choose not to get the vaccine. No dining, no sports, no concerts, no plays, no travel, no public transportation, none of it. Let them scream about overreach all alone while the rest of us get our lives back. Fuck you, Stephen. Fuck you. Fuck any of you who take this attitude. It is so difficult to talk about this because you get shouted down and you get people saying, you're being histrionic, you're being hyperbolic. But I never thought that we would be living in a time when so many citizens are urging the government to act in a fascist way in coordination with private business, to force people to get vaccinated. People with names, people with reputations, people with public standing are out there every single day telling social media and the legacy media that yes, we should stop American citizens from entering grocery stores. We should stop them from crossing state lines. We should stop them from going to a museum. We should make it illegal for them to get on a plane unless they get the injection we tell them to get. How does this not scare everybody? The only thing I can come up with is it doesn't scare people that it should scare because they're more afraid of something else. It's like what we talked about last week. This comes down to a bottomless, depthless, neurotic fear of mortality. They are so afraid of this virus, so ultimately and finally afraid of this virus, that everything else pales in comparison. I think that if we took that hysterical psychiatrically unstable level of fear about this virus away, then a number of these people would wake up. They would instantly say, oh my God, I went really far. I actually thought it was a good idea for American citizens to be stopped from crossing state lines. I thought it was a good idea for people to be not allowed to actually go to a grocery store and get food because they didn't get vaccinated. What was I thinking? The level of risk is so out of proportion to the real harm. Again, bring it back to reality. This is not my opinion. It's not a number that I picked up out of thin air. It's really real. Even if you don't like what I'm saying, and even if you think I'm wrong, you yourself can go behind me. You can confirm that the number I'm about to tell you is real. And you'll get it confirmed by places you like and that you trust, the CDC. This virus, more than 99% of people who contract the COVID-19 virus live. The survival rate is higher than 99%. Does that mean something to you? It should. That's it, folks. That's all I got. I got nothing else. Take care. Have a good week. And I'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.